You're under arrest for loitering and suspected solicitation.
She was slammed against a patrol car, cuffed in public, and paraded through the streets like a criminal, but by the time they reached the precinct, the officer realized he had just arrested his own superior. The night air hung thick over the East Heights district, a place where street lamps flickered like dying promises and sirens were just part of the city's rhythm. Trash skittered across cracked sidewalks, blown by the wind between boarded-up storefronts and graffiti-covered walls. The kind of place where people kept their heads down, not because they had something to hide, but because the city had long stopped looking out for them. Officer Kyle Mercer sat behind the wheel of his squad car, jaw tight, fingers tapping the steering wheel. 28, white, and eager to rise fast in a department where arrests meant points and points meant promotions. His field training officer had once told him, "Don't just patrol, control." Kyle took that to heart. Tonight, like most nights, he was scanning the shadows for movement, for anything that smelled off. That's when he saw her. A lone woman standing under a busted streetlight, wearing jeans, boots, and a tan leather jacket. She was black, maybe in her 30s, average height, fit, confident posture. Her eyes flicked from side to side, watching, not wandering. She wasn't dressed like the women who worked this block, but Kyle didn't care. She was out here alone after dark, near Lincoln and Fifth, the corner known for deals, gun drops, and disappearances. Kyle's radio buzzed, but he ignored it. He threw the car into park and stepped out. The woman turned as he approached, her face unreadable. "Evening, ma'am," Kyle said, hand on his belt. "Can I ask what you're doing out here?" She looked at him calmly. "I'm working." He raised an eyebrow. "Working? Just, save it," he cut in. "You got ID?" She opened her mouth to speak again, but Kyle stepped closer, towering over her now. He had seen enough. The glance over her shoulder, the stiff posture, the street. She fit the pattern. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." "What?" "You're under arrest for loitering and suspected solicitation." "I'm not a—" "Turn around." Her jaw tightened, but she complied. As he clicked the cuffs around her wrists, he could feel the adrenaline rushing through him. Another collar. Another score. Another bad night cleaned up. "You don't know who I am," she said quietly as he walked her to the car. "Sure I do," Kyle muttered. "You're another statistic waiting to happen." She didn't argue. She sat in the back of the cruiser, calm, quiet, watching the city slide by like a woman who'd been through worse. When they reached the precinct, Kyle pulled her out of the car, guided her inside, and handed her off to booking. "Name?" the desk officer asked. She stared at Kyle for a beat, then turned to the desk. "Detective First Grade Nina Harrington. Badge number 47261. Internal Investigations assigned to Major Crimes Task Force. And I want to speak to your captain." The room froze. Kyle blinked. "Detective." The booking officer stared at the computer, then typed furiously. Within seconds, her profile came up. NYPD. 13 years. Commendations. Undercover active. Kyle's chest tightened. That can't be right. The desk officer stood up. "Captain Doyle. Get him down here. Now." Kyle took a step back as Nina looked him square in the eye. "I tried to tell you," she said. "But you were too busy profiling me to listen." Silence hung in the room like a hammer waiting to drop. Moments later, Captain Doyle arrived, black, mid-50s, tall, weathered from decades in the force. His eyes swept the room, then locked on Kyle. "What the hell happened?" Kyle stumbled through an explanation, but every word dug the hole deeper. Nina watched, arms folded, still cuffed, her eyes steady. "She's been embedded in East Heights for 2 months, Doyle barked. "She's gathering intel on a trafficking ring. You just blew her cover. Do you know how dangerous that is? Do you?" Kyle's voice cracked. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Nina said. "You assumed." That cut sharper than anything else. The way she said it, not angry, not emotional, just resigned. Like she'd seen it too many times before. Doyle turned to the desk officer. "Get those cuffs off her." As the metal clicked open, Kyle felt his stomach sink. Every ounce of certainty, of power, of control, replaced by a shame he couldn't shake. Nina rubbed her wrists, stepped forward and spoke again, not just to Kyle but to the room. This is exactly what I'm investigating. Officers making snap judgments based on skin, neighborhood, posture. You're supposed to protect this city, not profile it. Nobody said a word. Even the radio chatter seemed quieter. Then, as if flipping a switch, Nina turned back to Doyle. I need to get back to the field. The target's been circling the corner every Thursday night. I might have just bought a little more suspicion. Or I might have earned their trust. Doyle nodded. Do what you need to. We'll handle the fallout. As Nina walked out, free, focused, and furious, Kyle sat frozen. He hadn't just made a bad call. He'd failed the badge. And something about her words stuck in his chest, pulsing like an echo. You're supposed to protect this city, not profile it. The hospital lights were too bright. Not because they were faulty or too white, but because they revealed too much, every cut, every bruise, every exhausted line etched into Nina Harrington's face as she lay propped up in the narrow bed of room 6C. Her lip was swollen, her wrists bore red marks from the restraints, and a dark, angry bruise bloomed along her collarbone where the crowbar had struck. But her eyes, those sharp, unblinking, steel-hardened eyes, had not dimmed. Kyle sat beside her, not in uniform, not in control, just present. He hadn't said much since they arrived. The paramedics did their job. The ER staff stitched her up. Captain Doyle came in, took her full statement, nodded once, then left with a promise, we'll get Finch. One way or another. Now it was just them. Nina turned slowly to look at him. The silence between them wasn't awkward, but it wasn't warm either. It was loaded. Fragile. I thought I was going to die in there, she said, voice low, raspy from dehydration and pain. They were going to move me to a warehouse across state lines tonight. Off the grid. Kyle looked down at his hands, shame burning like acid beneath his skin. I saw it all happening, Nina continued. And all I could think about was how none of it would have happened if I'd just stayed in the car. Or if I'd lied about my name when you arrested me. Or if I hadn't trusted anyone. You trusted me, Kyle said quietly. No, she replied, her voice sharpening. I left a breadcrumb for the job. Not for you. You just happened to have the decency to follow it after you realized what you did. Kyle nodded, slowly, swallowing the bitter truth. She didn't owe him forgiveness. She didn't owe him grace. And yet, here she was, broken but alive, speaking to him plainly, giving him the clarity that no superior ever had. I was trained for what happened to me, she said. But what I wasn't trained for was being mistaken for a criminal by the same people I bleed for. He blinked hard, jaw tightening. I was wrong. Yes, she replied, but it's not just about you. It's about every cop who sees someone like me and thinks streetwalker, mule, bait, threat, anything but law enforcement. I've walked into buy busts with drug lords, into back rooms with traffickers, I've worn wires under my skin and steel in my spine. But nothing prepared me for the humiliation of being cuffed by a brother in blue, in front of my block, while I was working to keep it safe. Kyle's throat tightened. I want to be better. Wanting isn't enough, Nina said, leaning back against the pillow, wincing from the pain. It has to cost you something. He didn't reply. He couldn't. She was right. Just then Doyle returned. His face was taut, his eyes unreadable. He stepped inside, looked at both of them, and closed the door behind him. We found Finch, he said. Sort of. Sort of. Nina asked, her voice sharpening again. He was tipped off before we could serve the warrant. We raided his house. Cleaned out. Phones wiped. Laptops gone. But we found financial ledgers, security footage, burner IDs, and some sensitive departmental memos that tie him to at least 4 other dirty officers. Internal affairs is moving fast, but so is he. Nina exhaled slowly. He won't go far. He's not that smart. Doyle smirked grimly. He's smart enough to know he's at war now. Kyle leaned forward. What do we do? Doyle looked at him with measured scrutiny. We go public. Nina gives her story. We expose what Finch started. But more importantly, we clean house. And Kyle, you're going to help. Kyle sat up straight, confused. Me? Nina raised an eyebrow. You sure about that, Captain? Doyle nodded. He made a catastrophic mistake, yes. But he's the reason we found you. And now? We need someone willing to turn the spotlight inward. We're assigning him to community liaison and internal oversight. He'll be auditing arrest reports, flagging profiling patterns, and sitting down with people we usually ignore. Kyle's face went pale. You're making me the face of reform? No, Doyle said, eyes narrowing. I'm making you the bridge. Whether you like it or not. Nina chuckled bitterly. Congratulations. You've officially been baptized in fire. Kyle swallowed hard. I'll do it. You better, Doyle said, already turning toward the door. You cost this department enough. As the door shut behind him, the room fell into silence again. Nina closed her eyes, resting her head back. I don't hate you, Kyle, she said after a moment. He looked at her, surprised. I've seen worse men. I've seen better too. You're somewhere in the middle, still figuring it out. Just don't mistake guilt for growth. If you want to be different, prove it. Kyle nodded slowly. I will. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to crack open the sky. Another day was coming, one full of paperwork, interviews, press heat, and accountability. But inside that hospital room, under the sterile glow of fluorescent light, a reckoning had already begun. Kyle didn't leave right away. He sat with her in silence, watching the sky shift from black to gray to pale gold, knowing that this was only the beginning of something much harder than redemption. This was reckoning. And reckoning never comes easy. The first time Kyle Mercer walked into the Internal Oversight Division, he felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. It wasn't the AC. It was the looks. Cold, sharp, and surgical. Each officer who passed him didn't need to say a word. Their eyes said it all. Betrayer. Snitch. Weak link. This wasn't how he thought redemption would look. He imagined approval, even forgiveness. But instead, he'd been branded, not by the public, not even by Nina, but by the very brothers and sisters he once swore loyalty to. Because in their eyes, he hadn't just arrested the wrong person. He had exposed the rot, and worse, agreed to help scrub it out. The office was plain. Metal desks, thin computers, piles of dusty reports from years past, most unopened, forgotten. A bulletin board in the corner held pinned articles about community trust and data transparency, but no one was reading them. It was a department no one wanted to exist, a reminder that the force had cracks and some of them ran deep. Kyle's new desk sat in the corner, surrounded by silence. On day one, he was handed a box of body cam footage and a stack of complaint files. Some dated back months, others years. Most were closed without discipline. His job now was to re-review, investigate patterns, flag officers who showed repeated signs of bias, and interview community members who had been dismissed. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fun. But it was real. That afternoon, his first community liaison session took place inside a makeshift meeting room at a rec center in East Heights, the same neighborhood where he'd arrested Nina. This time, there were no guns, no cuffs, no radio chatter. Just chairs in a circle, coffee in styrofoam cups, and wary eyes. They knew who he was. The man who cuffed a black woman on her own block. The man who didn't listen. A middle-aged woman named Ms. Geneva was the first to speak. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "My grandson was stopped 3 times last month," she said, holding a photo of a teenage boy in a hoodie, eyes soft, smile wide. "He wasn't doing anything wrong. Just walking home. They made him sit on the curb like he was a dog. They never found anything. But now? He walks with his shoulders hunched, like he's already guilty." Kyle listened, his chest tightening with each word. A younger man, Malik, jumped in next. "Y'all never see us as sons or students or business owners. We're suspects before we even say hello. I'm sick of it." Another woman added, "Your badge doesn't scare me. Your silence does." Kyle wanted to speak, wanted to explain, but for once, he understood the power of not speaking. He wrote everything down. Not defensively, not as a formality, but to remember. Because these weren't just complaints. These were wounds. Wounds like Nina's, only deeper, older, carried across generations. When the session ended, Kyle stepped outside into the evening air, heart heavy, head full. He thought of Nina. She had been released from the hospital 2 days earlier, refusing medical leave. Instead, she returned to the task force with bruises barely healed, jaw still stiff when she spoke. She didn't want flowers or apologies. She wanted results. That night, she sat alone in a dark surveillance van 3 blocks from Prospect Avenue. Her laptop glowed as she scrubbed through traffic cam footage, looking for patterns in Finch's known hangouts. She refused backup. She refused to be sidelined. In the silence, her phone buzzed. Text from Doyle, "Update." She replied quickly, "Nothing yet. Tell Kyle the streets still don't trust him." She put the phone down, sighing. The truth was, she didn't know what to do with Kyle Mercer. He was guilty, but unlike the others, he hadn't doubled down. He hadn't hidden. He had owned it. And now, he was forcing himself to sit in rooms most officers wouldn't dare enter. Still, trust was currency, and he hadn't earned enough yet. Suddenly, something on the screen caught her eye. A familiar car. Black Lexus. Same plates from the warehouse where she'd been held. The timestamp, 2 hours ago. Location, just outside a printing shop on Westfield. She pulled up city permits. The building was listed as vacant. Her eyes narrowed. She texted Doyle, "Hit on Finch. Possible front at Westfield print. Going in now." She grabbed her vest, tucked her weapon at her side, and stepped into the night. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Kyle was still sifting through records when a name on a complaint jumped out at him, Lieutenant Ronald Finch, filed by a 17-year-old boy from 3 months earlier, claiming Finch threatened to plant drugs during a late-night stop. The complaint was closed. No action taken. He leaned back, stunned. Finch wasn't new to this. He'd been operating in plain sight, abusing power, silencing voices, and the system had let it slide. But not anymore. His phone buzzed. A message from Doyle. Nina followed a lead. Westfield Print Shop. Get there now. Kyle grabbed his coat, rushed to the lot, and sped off into the city, mind racing. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew one thing. If Nina was walking into a trap, he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Not again. The precinct felt colder than usual. Not because of the air conditioning, but because the truth was starting to crack through the walls. Officer Kyle Mercer sat in silence across from Captain Doyle in the back seat of an unmarked sedan as they coasted through a side alley near the abandoned laundromat Maya had described. His jaw was clenched, fingers twitching on his thighs, mind racing through every possibility. The name Lieutenant Ronald Finch haunted him like a ghost, not just because Finch was high-ranking, but because Kyle had once looked up to him, believed he was the kind of cop who didn't fold under pressure. Now, he wasn't so sure. Stay focused, Doyle said sharply, snapping Kyle out of his thoughts. This isn't about cleaning your conscience. It's about saving her life. Kyle nodded, heart pounding as the car pulled into a shadowed lot behind the derelict building. The structure loomed in front of them like a skeleton, brick walls smeared with graffiti, windows boarded up with warped plywood, and a rusted door hanging loose from one hinge. From the outside, it looked like nothing but forgotten concrete. But appearances, Kyle now knew too well, meant nothing. Doyle gestured with his chin. This is where the handoffs happen. Maya's photos lined up with that corner over there. The guy with the Yankees cap always takes post by the dumpster. Kyle scanned the area, every detail burning into his brain. Do we go in now? Doyle shook his head. We observe. We need confirmation. If Finch is involved, he's too smart to show his face in a place like this. But if his crew's operating here, we can make them talk. They waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Just as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched longer across the alley, movement emerged from the far end of the lot. A car, black, tinted windows, rolled in slow and smooth. It stopped by the side entrance. Two men exited. One of them wore a red Yankees cap, exactly like in Maya's photos. The other was bald, heavily built, with thick tattoos across his forearms. Kyle's breath caught in his throat. The men opened the trunk and pulled out a single duffel bag. Kyle reached for his service pistol. "Not yet," Doyle murmured. "We don't know who else is here." Suddenly, the door to the laundromat creaked open. A third figure stepped out. Kyle's eyes narrowed. The man was older, lean, white, with silver-gray hair and a limp on his right leg. He wasn't wearing a badge, but Kyle recognized him instantly. Lieutenant Ronald Finch. His chest went tight. There was no mistaking it now. Finch wasn't just facilitating this operation. He was in it, deep. "Doyle," Kyle whispered, voice tight with disbelief. "He's here. He's leading it." Doyle's eyes never left the scene. "You sure?" "I'd bet my badge." "Let's get closer." They exited the vehicle slowly, staying behind the wall of a nearby building. Kyle could hear faint voices now, laughter, low conversation, the sound of zippers and metal clinking. The duffel was unzipped. Bundles of cash. Clear bags of pills. A clipboard with markings. It was a deal. Clean, rehearsed, arrogant. Then Doyle's radio crackled. "All units, be advised, we have a 911 call reporting a woman screaming near the old garment factory on Drexler. Suspect vehicle, black van, plates obscured. Caller disconnected." Doyle looked at Kyle. "That's 6 blocks from here." Kyle's stomach turned. She could be there. Finch barked something at his men, then nodded toward the red-capped one, who returned to the black car and drove off in the same direction the call had come from. "We split," Doyle said immediately. "You follow the van. I'll call for backup to take this scene. If she's alive, we're not wasting a second." Kyle didn't hesitate. Within moments, he was back in the unmarked car, tailing the black vehicle with enough distance not to be spotted, his heart slamming against his ribs. The streets blurred as they cut through empty industrial blocks until the van slowed near the edge of the old garment district, a row of decaying warehouses wrapped in iron fencing and overgrown weeds. The van stopped behind a side building and killed its lights. Kyle pulled over 2 blocks back, got out, and moved forward on foot. As he approached the building, he heard it, muffled shouting, a thud, then silence. Gun drawn, he edged toward the cracked open door and peeked inside. There she was. Detective Nina Harrington, tied to a chair, blood trickling from a cut on her lip, eyes burning with defiance. Standing in front of her was the man in the red Yankees cap, pacing, angry, holding a crowbar in one hand and a phone in the other. "She said she's a cop," the man growled into the phone. "What do you want me to do?" No, she didn't give up the flash drive. She handed it off. Another pause. Kyle didn't wait. He stepped inside, weapon raised. "NYPD. Drop it now." The man spun, startled. The crowbar clanged to the floor as Kyle charged forward and tackled him, both of them crashing into a stack of crates. The fight was violent, fast, unrelenting. Fists connected. Blood smeared the floor. But Kyle didn't let go. He drove his elbow into the man's chest, pinned him down, and finally wrenched the cuffs around his wrists. Breathing hard, he rushed to Nina. Her face was bruised, but her eyes, fierce, alive, found his with a flicker of disbelief. "You," she said, her voice hoarse. Kyle nodded, cutting the ropes. "I'm here now. You left me a name. I followed it." Nina leaned forward slowly, wincing in pain. "You could have ignored it." "I did once," he said. "Not again." For a second, silence filled the warehouse, not the kind born from emptiness, but from something unspoken passing between them. The second chance. A silent apology. A thread of trust forming where shame once lived. Doyle's voice rang over Kyle's radio. "Units on site. Laundromat secured. Finch fled. But we've got enough on him now." Kyle clicked his mic, "And I've got Nina." The streets of East Heights looked different now. They had always been rough, cracked sidewalks, broken glass crunching under boots, liquor store signs half lit in the haze of flickering neon, but now, for Officer Kyle Mercer, they pulsed with something deeper. Guilt. Suspicion. Urgency. He walked alongside Captain Doyle in silence, both men dressed in plain clothes as they headed down Lincoln and Fifth. Kyle scanned every alley, every stoop, every door, but his mind kept circling the same question. Why would Nina trust him with a clue after everything he did to her? Keep your eyes open, Doyle said as they approached a rundown apartment building with peeling yellow paint and broken mailboxes. If Maya's still here, she'll be watching us before we ever spot her. Kyle nodded, eyes narrowing as they entered the building. The hallway smelled of old grease and dust, with walls stained by years of water leaks and cigarette smoke. Somewhere behind one of the doors, the key to Nina's disappearance might be hiding in fear. They stopped at Unit 3B. Kyle raised his hand and knocked, firm but cautious. No response. He knocked again. Maya, it's the NYPD. We're not here to arrest you. We need your help. Nina Harrington is missing. Still nothing. Then, just as Doyle was about to speak, they heard a lock slide from behind the door. Slowly, it creaked open. A woman in her mid-20s peeked through the gap, thin, jittery, dark circles under her eyes, with shoulder-length braids that looked unwashed and neglected. She was wearing a baggy hoodie and holding the door chain tight. Maya? Kyle asked softly. She looked at him, then at Doyle, then back at Kyle again. Her eyes darted behind them to check if anyone else was in the hallway. She told me never to open the door, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Doyle stepped forward, lowering his tone. She trusted you. She also knew the risk. But now she's gone. Disappeared. We think someone made the connection after the photo went public. Maya's breath caught. Kyle leaned in gently. We're not here to burn you. We're here because whatever she was trying to stop, it's still moving. And we think you're the only one who can point us in the right direction. The chain rattled. Then, slowly, she unhooked it and opened the door fully. Inside, the apartment was dim, cluttered with fast food wrappers, old case files, notebooks, and surveillance photos tacked onto the walls. Maya backed away from them, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was watching them, Maya said, nodding to the wall. Every Thursday night, same 3 men. They hang around the burned-out laundromat near Prospect. Never buy anything. Never say much. But they pass bags off. Sometimes envelopes. Kyle looked over the wall. Photos of men, one bald with tattoos up his neck, another wearing thick gold chains, and the third always in a red Yankees cap. The photos were grainy, but clear enough. She thought one of them was ex-NYPD, Maya continued. Said he kept showing up in places he shouldn't, and nobody wanted to talk about him. Said she had proof, just needed to confirm the money trail. Doyle's face tightened. This wasn't just about street-level trafficking. It's internal. Maya pointed to the back of the apartment. She gave me something. In case anything happened to her. She returned moments later with a small black flash drive wrapped in a Ziploc bag. She told me to hold it and only give it to someone if she didn't come back. She said it had names. Kyle took it carefully, his hands shaking as he looked down at it. Nina gave you this, he said, eyes locking with Maya's. She trusted you. And she trusted me enough to whisper your name during her arrest. Maya blinked back tears. I didn't want to believe she was gone. She's not, Kyle said. Not yet. Doyle stepped forward. We'll get this to internal affairs. If it's what we think it is, someone inside the department could be protecting the operation. Maya nodded, retreating to the couch, hugging her knees. As Kyle and Doyle stepped out of the apartment, Kyle turned back to look at the scared young woman alone in the shadows. He had cuffed someone like her once too, back when he didn't see faces, only threats. That version of himself felt like a lifetime ago, but guilt doesn't fade fast. They drove back to the precinct in silence, the flash drive secured inside a sealed evidence bag on Doyle's lap. The entire ride, Kyle couldn't stop thinking about Nina. About how she had said, "Look for Maya," even after he humiliated her. She had risked her life to protect her source, her mission, and the city. At the precinct, they plugged the drive into a secure terminal in Doyle's office. The screen filled with spreadsheets, documents, scanned memos, and photos of wire transfers, all tying known street dealers to bank accounts registered to shell corporations. One recurring name kept popping up on transaction logs. Lieutenant Ronald Finch. Kyle's stomach dropped. Finch, he asked. He was on my academy board. He runs Midtown Narcotics now. Doyle stared at the screen. If this is real, he's the one laundering the cash and clearing the blocks for movement. Nina was getting close. Kyle felt cold. Then if Finch saw that photo, he knew exactly who she was. And if he knew who she was, then she wasn't just in danger, she was a target. Doyle stood abruptly. We need to move. If she's still alive, we're running out of time. Before he left the room, Doyle turned to Kyle, his voice firm. You wanted to fix this? This is your shot. You go with me. But one mistake, just one, and I pull you off the street for good. Kyle didn't flinch. I'm ready. But inside, he wasn't sure if he was ready to find Nina alive, or face what it would mean if they were already too late. He hadn't slept. Not even for a minute. Officer Kyle Mercer sat at his desk in the precinct with his elbows pressed against his knees, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor as the minutes ticked by like a slow drip in a leaky cell. He wasn't in uniform anymore, not because he didn't want to wear it, but because the captain had ordered him to change after Nina Harrington stormed out of the building with her badge around her neck and fury in her stride. Everything since last night played on loop in his mind. The look in her eyes when he ignored her, the cold finality in her voice when she gave her name, and the silence in the precinct lobby when her identity was confirmed. His chest felt tight, not from guilt alone, but from the growing realization that one arrogant moment might have just ended not only his career but put a decorated officer's life in danger. He didn't just arrest a colleague, he had compromised an entire investigation. A door slammed behind him. He looked up quickly. Captain Doyle entered, face unreadable, lips tight, a folder in his hand and disappointment in his eyes. He didn't say anything at first. He stood across from Kyle, opened the file, and pulled out 2 sheets. One was a typed incident report, the other, a printed image of Officer Mercer leading a handcuffed Nina Harrington past a corner store, head down, mouth bleeding slightly from where she'd been shoved too hard into the cruiser. That got leaked, Doyle said flatly, laying the photo on the desk. News blog picked it up already. They're calling it a racial profiling incident. It's spreading fast. Kyle swallowed hard. Captain, I didn't mean. No, Doyle cut him off. You didn't think. That's the problem. The captain leaned over the desk slightly, eyes burning now. She was deep in a case we've been chasing for months. Trafficking, fentanyl pipelines, dirty politicians. She was embedded, no backup, no badge, no name. Her cover was airtight until you decided she looked out of place. And now, the whole operation's compromised. Kyle looked down, ashamed. I didn't know she was a cop. Doyle stepped back, disgusted. She tried to tell you. You just didn't want to hear it. There was a long pause, one that let the weight of every word settle in like a storm cloud inside the room. Then Doyle added, voice quieter, more deadly, "You're lucky she didn't press charges. Internal Affairs is still reviewing it. If it were up to me, your badge would already be in that drawer." He tapped the desk once, hard, then turned and walked out without another word. Kyle sat still, the air in the room feeling too thin to breathe. His mind spiraled, not just over what he'd done, but over what he'd believed. He prided himself on following the rules, doing things by the book, staying sharp. But the truth was he saw a black woman in a tough neighborhood, and instead of asking questions, he filled in the blanks with bias he hadn't even admitted he carried. Now that quiet decision might have cost lives. A few hours later, he was summoned again, this time to the briefing room. When he entered, the lights were low, and a projector screen glowed against the far wall. A grainy surveillance video played silently, time-stamped from earlier that morning. It showed Nina, same leather jacket, same jeans, pacing back and forth at a corner near Lincoln and Fifth. Then, two men approached her. They spoke briefly. One handed her something. She gave a nod. The men walked off. The room was silent except for the voice of a tall black man at the front. Special Agent Carl Benton from the FBI's Joint Task Force. She was supposed to meet her primary source this morning, Benton said, his jaw tight. We lost contact after she left the precinct. She hasn't checked in since. Kyle's stomach turned. We're hoping she made it look like nothing changed, Benton continued. But if those men saw that photo online, if they recognized her, we may have just handed her over to the wolves. A deep murmur moved through the room. Kyle stepped forward, chest hollow. Let me help find her. Benton looked at him, slow and cold. You've helped enough, officer. Those words didn't just sting, they carved something raw into Kyle's conscience. He turned and walked out of the room, fists clenched, throat tight. But then something clicked, a detail he hadn't remembered until now. Back when he arrested her as she sat in the cruiser, she had muttered something under her breath, just loud enough for the audio to catch it on his body cam. 3 words, look for Maya. At the time, he'd ignored it, brushed it off as rambling. Now it screamed for attention. He sprinted down the hall, pulled his body cam footage, and scrubbed through the file. Sure enough, there it was, time-stamped, clearly spoken. Look for Maya. He rushed back to Doyle's office, burst through the door. Sir, I need 5 minutes. Doyle was on the phone. He raised a finger, finished the call, and set it down slowly. Kyle didn't wait. I reviewed my body cam footage. She said something. During the arrest. It could be a lead. I think she was trying to leave a breadcrumb. Doyle's eyes narrowed. What did she say? Look for Maya. That's it. Just that. No context. The captain stood up immediately. Maya's the name of the confidential informant we lost 2 weeks ago. We thought she skipped town. Then maybe, Kyle said, his voice steadier now, Nina didn't just forgive me. Maybe she gave me something to fix it. Doyle stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Get your gear. We're going back to Lincoln and Fifth. The moment Nina stepped through the side entrance of the old Westfield print shop, she knew she wasn't alone. The stale smell of ink, dust, and something acrid clung to the air, and somewhere deeper inside, a faint humming echoed, maybe a machine still running, maybe a generator. The floor creaked under her boots, but she moved with the instinct of someone who'd survived worse. She hadn't waited for backup. She hadn't called for Kyle. This wasn't ego, it was unfinished business. She had tracked Finch this far. She wasn't about to let him vanish now. Her flashlight cut through the shadows, sweeping across empty presses, overturned chairs, and half-torn posters from a failed mayoral campaign. Then, from the far end of the room, she heard a voice, too familiar, too smug. Well, Harrington, you're harder to get rid of than I thought. She pivoted, gun raised. Finch stepped out from behind a stack of paper reams, hands relaxed, but eyes sharp with menace. His badge still clipped to his belt, as if it somehow still meant something. As if it could shield him from what he had done. I thought you'd be smarter, Nina said, voice low, steady, but laced with disgust. Running the game under the city's nose was one thing. But trying to kill a cop? That's not a cleanup job. That's suicide. Finch smirked. You think anyone's going to believe you? After your little meltdown? They already think you're unstable. One photo and the story flipped. You think internal's going to protect you? I don't need them to, she replied. Behind her, the door creaked again. Kyle Mercer entered slowly, gun at his side, not aimed, yet. You should be worried about me, Kyle said, voice tight, breath short from the sprint. Because I believed you. For years. I let you shape who I became. I thought you stood for something. Finch turned, chuckled dryly. Of course you did. You were easy to mold. You wanted to belong. You just never realized what it costs. Kyle stepped forward. I know now. Without hesitation, Nina tossed a flash drive to Kyle. Recording, she said, of this entire conversation. Hidden mic under my collar. Same one you missed last time. Finch's expression flickered. Rage, panic, disbelief. You just confessed, Ronald, Nina added, stepping closer. To attempted murder, obstruction, trafficking, and departmental conspiracy. You thought I was walking into this blind? Finch's hand twitched toward his waist. Nina raised her weapon, Kyle mirrored her. Don't, Kyle said, voice deeper now, less pleading, more certain. You're not walking out of here. Seconds stretched like lifetimes. Then Finch dropped his hand, let out a bitter breath, and laughed once more, not because it was funny, but because power doesn't know how to lose quietly. Everything's about to burn, he muttered. Nina stepped forward. Then I'll be the one holding the match. It took less than 20 minutes for backup to arrive. Finch was arrested without a struggle, cuffed with the same kind of restraint he once used to silence others. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Doyle made sure the media got the footage. The DA's office didn't wait either. Within days, the charges were stacked, evidence was filed, and investigations into Finch's network of dirty cops began to unravel like thread pulled from a fraying uniform. Nina returned to her precinct a week later, not to flowers or applause, but to quiet nods of respect. The kind that matters more than ceremony. Kyle kept his new post in internal oversight. He attended community sessions, logged long hours in case files, and kept his head down. Not to hide, but to rebuild. One morning, Nina walked into his office unannounced. He looked up, surprised. Detective. She handed him a folder. Testimony packet, she said. I'm recommending your promotion stay on track. Kyle blinked. You don't have to. I know, she interrupted. But I see what you're doing. You're not running from what happened. You're turning it into fuel. That matters. He stood, unsure of what to say. She turned to leave, then paused. But remember, she added, redemption is a process. Not a press release. The city didn't change overnight. But it started to. Policies shifted. Civilian boards gained more power. Training programs were restructured. Officers were reminded that instinct without discipline is just recklessness. That the badge doesn't absolve you from consequence. And through it all, Nina kept walking the streets, head held high, her presence louder than any press conference. She wasn't a hero. She was proof. Proof that you could be bruised and still unbreakable, silenced and still heard, profiled and still powerful. And Kyle? He became something else. Not the perfect cop, but the kind that listens. The kind that asks questions before drawing conclusions. The kind that understands that trust isn't a uniform. It's earned. Layer by layer, story by story. So now we ask you, the viewer, is it enough to punish the guilty, or must we also rebuild the culture that allowed them to rise? Would you have done what Nina did? Or what Kyle did? Let us know in the comments. And if this story resonates with you, if it made you angry, hopeful, or just opened your eyes a little wider, then hit like, share it, and subscribe to this channel for more stories where truth fights back and justice, no matter how slow, never stays silent. Because sometimes the most powerful badge you can wear is the truth.